Is 12:30, and welcome everybody joining us for another Grab and Go Growth Tactics webinar. We're going to give you 30 minutes on the tactical, and today we're going to talk about the Excellence Challenge, give you guys some takeaways on excellence across a couple different domains. But first I want to introduce the two lovely gentlemen joining me, or have them introduce themselves. Tim Barry, who are you?
Tim Barry. I own Sandler Training of Fort Worth, Texas, located in the beautiful Republic of Texas. And just glad to be here. Thank you.
Good morning.
Johnny.
I am John Vanderslice, and I own a Sandler Performance Center here in New Jersey. And let's see what other interesting facts I want to tell you that I haven't told you already in the past week. So much like Jim and Tim, I mean, our businesses are similar. Our business here in New Jersey, we work a lot with business owners, CEOs, and kind of forward-thinking individuals on sales training. Again, much like Tim and Jim.
There you go. Appreciate that. My name is Jim Wilcox. I'm the owner of a Sandler Performance Center in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We also have a location in South Bend, Indiana. Much like John and Tim, we're working with very forward-thinking individuals and organizations to help them achieve their next level of excellence or their next iteration of growth. So appreciate everyone joining us. We still have people coming on to the webinar session, so I appreciate that. John, do you want to talk a little bit about how we came across this topic and kind of share some thoughts?
Sure. So when Tim and Jim and I were talking about, kind of the current environment and what we're hearing across our clients or across the country as we talk to people, there's a lot of themes, and probably one that we're hearing most often is sometimes it seems like people are a bit stuck. Meaning that really not quite sure, what direction to go, or if we should be going in any direction, or should we wait till we get a little more of a clear understanding of where things are headed, and not really sure, again, what strategy to employ or what tactics to put in place. So we thought it was important to maybe address that, and we've tried to do that in a couple of different sessions that we've each been doing together and individually. I was involved with a webinar earlier in the week where we talked about, is it worthwhile to be setting goals right now? Are they worth it, or waste of time right now? And those types of conversations led us to think about tactically, what can we give people that you can actually maybe put your hands around and say, okay, here's a behavior, here are some tactics that we can do to help move our business forward. Because we've talked a lot about preserving our attitude and staying positive, and the kind of the what we should be doing. And again, the focus on the grab and go is around, how do we do it and what's some meaningful steps. And when we picked this topic, the Excellence Challenge, we looked at, okay, what are some best practices that people that we know or clients that we have are doing that's making a difference for them in their business. So we picked three tactics today that we'll share with you. But here's what I want to say about that. As much as we would love to say there's some hidden Sandler moves or tricks, or there's some advanced strategies or tactics that you can use, that's really not true. What we know is that the people that are excellent and the companies that are excellent, it's not that they have one thing that they're great at or something that somebody else doesn't have. Now, certainly that may be the cases in certain particular businesses, but on average, that's not the case. What we know in anything, whether it's sports or business or personal lives, it's the things, and oftentimes the fundamental things that we do consistently. So that's kind of the theme. And we're going to give you some things today that maybe will seem fundamental, right? But what we will tell you is they absolutely do work. And if you have a little bit of faith and hope in these behaviors, I think it'll make a difference in your business.
Absolutely. And if I can add in onto that too, John, I want to make the point that, look, we're going to give you 3 things that you can walk away with today. These are not all inclusive. You know, as we prepared for this session today, and this could be a 4-hour session on excellence, and you know, really the intent of it is to give you 3 things that that you can take away and run with today that are fundamental, that are usable right now. So, Tim, when we went around the horn in our preparation for this, you know, we talked about a topic that you're passionate about, which is time blocking. You want to start us off and
Sure.
talk a little bit about time blocking?
Sure. No, I love that. And you know, here's a real simple concept, but especially when we're now in different working environments than we're used to. We're not at our offices in the same way that we were before. Now, a lot of us are doing our leading, our managing, and our selling. Almost every function throughout your organization is happening online. And so it's more difficult because there can be less structure into the course of your day. And what that gives you the opportunity of is, yes, you can make jokes about going back and forth to the refrigerator 35 times and how this quarantine thing may be really bad for our waistlines. But there's a real simple way to create structure in your own calendar, even remotely. And so the challenge for us is to time block. And you know, in the Sandler sales world, what we know is that your high-performing salesperson spends 60% of the white space on their calendar prospecting for new business. Now think about that. The concept of having, you know, the white space on your Outlook calendar, and if you're not using your Outlook calendar for everything, or some other online calendar that you can access, you're putting yourself at the mercy of everyone else's schedule. And so time blocking is really quite simple. You block out the behaviors that are fundamental and core. They're both urgent and important to what your primary job function is. And so time blocking may look like, if you're in sales, for example, you know that of the available, during work hours, we call them your prime time selling hours, which are probably from 8 o'clock until 5 o'clock. Those are what we call pay time hours. And so if you block out time for your prospecting, if you block out your time for doing proposals, if you block out your time for delivering content to your clients, whatever that is, then you put yourself in a much better position, because now you're in control of your behaviors. And what we know is that when we're at home, when we're working remote, it's super easy to get squirrel off into 100 different directions. And so time blocking is, while it may sound almost too rudimentary, let me just give you an example of how I time block in my calendar. In my calendar, I put everything in there. So there's 2 things that happen when you do that. One, everybody that I have a shared calendar with, which includes all of my team, they can see when, what I'm doing and when. Now, for those of you that might be concerned with the possibility of micromanaging, you got to get over that, because here's what it is. I defend my calendar like I'm gonna have to get in a fist fight over it. So people know when I've got a time block for scheduled interruptions, if you will, then they can actually walk into my office and they can ask me questions at random. But when it's time to do my core functions and I have my time block set out for prospecting, it doesn't matter if the building is on fire or my house is on fire, which is what we're doing now. I protect my calendar blocks, and that keeps me functionally going in the right direction. It helps me stay focused, and that's how we achieve the results that we're looking for. Does that make sense, Jim? John?
Yeah, I think so. I think, Tim, you talked about it from a sales angle. John, I'm curious, time blocking from a management perspective. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the interesting thing when we we looked at all three of these tactics today, we talked about they can apply whether you're in sales, you're in management, you're in leadership, and they're not unique to any. But I think on the management and leadership side, what we are finding people doing that's effective in this knits very well with what Tim said is goal time versus clock time. So, you know, if you're a business owner or you're an entrepreneur, like all of us, we have a million things to do and we write them down on a list and we get you know, we embark on the day and we do our work. And at the end of the day, we say, oh, God, I didn't get as much done as I wanted to. And the list, you know, continues. And what several of our people in organizational excellence are doing, the business owners, is they're looking at goal time, where they're having a list of the 3 or 4 or 5 things that they really want to get done in that day, and they go to work on those things. They don't run their day by the clock, but they'll focus on those things, and they're getting a lot more traction. They're finding that they're much more time efficient, and they're focusing more on the goal and those very specific things rather than just letting the clock run the day for them.
Absolutely. I think that, you know, one last thing to point out from a time blocking perspective, and this has been said a number of times, which is keeping your routine through, or establishing a routine through this COVID time, right? And time blocking helps in that. If I've got, you know, my morning exercise or my morning devotionals or my morning journaling built into my calendar, I'm much more likely to get up and be part of that routine, right? So my journaling is in my calendar, you know, every day, and I protect that time, and it's helped me personally maintain a pretty tight routine through this COVID time. Otherwise, I may sleep until 8 and work in my pajamas, and not that I would ever do that, but, you know, I could be at risk for that. So, yeah. So, all right, the next topic, right, that we picked and talked about, and it's one that I thought might be a good one to bring here is, and this applies from not only a management perspective, but a sales professional's perspective as well. And that is, are you an 18-second listener, right? And John, you have a relationship with the person who brought this concept forward, right? And so it's Tom Peters, correct?
Yes.
So Tom Peters brought this, and he's written a lot about excellence. And I know that you and Tim Brown on my team are big Tom Peters fans. And, you know, he put out there that, you know, most managers, 8 out of 10 managers, are often an 18-second listener. I think that a lot of traditional salespeople are 18-second listeners. And this came from a study that he referenced where the average physician waits about 18 seconds before they interject and interrupt you as the patient with their opinion or their expertise. And I think from a management perspective, we may do that, right? From a salesperson's perspective, we talk a lot about listening to respond versus listening to react. And a lot of times we're in react mode. We're looking for that moment where we can insert the interruption. The key here is that we are given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be engaging proportionately to those numbers. We should be listening twice as long as we're actually speaking. And a lot of times we get this one somewhat backwards. We listen 18 seconds, we listen for that opportunity to insert our opinion, and we move on. So when you think about it from a management perspective, I may listen to John if I'm managing John, for example, and I may have heard enough within 18 seconds and say, John, you know what? I have been down this road before. Why don't you do it this way and report back? And that really, while it seems efficient, is not necessarily in John's best interest, right? Coaching John through that scenario, helping him come to some sort of self-discovery around that scenario, allowing John to strategically fail is going to be in his best interest. And John, thank you for putting up the link to Tom Peters in there. So grab that out of the chat, if you will, and we may want to share that with everybody, John. It's just all the panelists, but we may want to take a look at that and evaluate as a manager and a leader or as a salesperson, am I just listening to react or am I listening to make a calculated response? Tim, John, any further comments on that? John, I know you're very intimate with Tom Peters and his works, and curious if you guys have anything to add to that.
We got to figure out how to, my technology skills are exceedingly limited. So I have to, one of you guys can put that in the, I know my weaknesses, but we'll get that to everybody. But I highly recommend watching. Tom is very engaging. He wrote a great book back in about 1987 called In Search of Excellence. Great book. But he, again, as Jim pointed out, I think this is not just a sales thing or a management thing. It's the same thing in our personal lives. I don't know about you, but I oftentimes have a tendency unintentionally of substituting my thinking for somebody else's. You know, I assume something, or I think, yeah, I understand that, or I know where this is going. And every time I do that, it seems it doesn't end well. I mean, if you think about a fundamental in Sandler, right, is people don't just want to be heard, they want to be understood. So the point of this is strategic listening, which Tom will talk about, is very, very important. And it's listening to our prospects, it's listening to our employees, it's listening to our spouse, our friends. Really important. People want to be understood, especially in times like this. So this critical listening is really important. And I think you made a great point, Jim.
Thank you. And so, John, if we're going to go to our third kind of topic in this with, the excellence challenge, you picked a topic of air. Do you want to talk a little bit about air? Sure.
Yeah, it doesn't sound too sexy, does it, with air? But this is a pretty, let's say, an easy one. But I find that this is one of the most effective techniques that you can use if you're wanting to gain referrals, insights into new business, and build a pipeline. So what this is, and I'll give you an example how a few clients of mine have used it. The first thing they do is they sit down and they come up with a list of people that they can have a conversation with. And I'll explain what that conversation sounds like. And they'll come up with 25 or maybe 50 people, that they can either have a live conversation on the phone or in an email. And AIR is this, so it's very simply, maybe I call Jim and I say, hey, Jim, it's John, how are you? Good, everything going well with you in the business? Hey, Jim, I was wondering if you might be open to scheduling maybe a 20-minute conversation with me. Now, back in the day, a little while ago, a couple months, it was maybe a coffee, right? Maybe we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
But for right now, we'll say it's a Zoom call or a call. I'm interested in growing the business. We're coming out of this pandemic thing. It looks like things are brightening up a little bit. And I have a pretty good cookbook. Love to get your advice on, maybe based on everything I can talk about, who I should be talking to. And Jim, at the same time, I'm going to, I know you're doing the same thing. I touch a lot of people. I'd love to maybe learn a little bit more about you and see if I can help you. That same conversation, same kind of verbiage, and say, hey, Jim, I'd love to get your insight on where maybe I should be spending my time. Maybe there's some networking groups that would be appropriate, or some folks that I should be touching base with. And then the R, same thing, recommendations. Jim, would love to have a 20-minute conversation with you. And really the purpose is, I'd like to kind of walk through what I'm doing. I really respect you as a business person, and I know you're pretty dialed in. love to maybe get your recommendation of if I were going to take this forward and talk to people about what we do, kind of who do you recommend I talk to? Or where do you recommend maybe I should spend some of my time? If you think about it, who is going to, I've done this many, many, many times. I've never, ever had anybody say, what, you want my recommendation on what you're doing, right? Absolutely not. Remember, by nature, psychologists will tell you we're geared to want to help. Some people more than others, but we generally speaking want to help. So when we ask somebody for their advice or their insight or their recommendation, we're actually paying them a compliment. And why not talk to a whole bunch of people? As an example, in my own business, about 2 years ago, there's a guy with a neat name. His name's Marshall Pepper. And the funny part, a side note, Marshall's father was a doctor. So imagine that, your father's Dr. Pepper. So nice. Marshall Pepper, I called Marshall, had that conversation, said, hey, Marshall, I really respect you, what you're doing. Love to maybe get some insights in what I'm doing and maybe where I could spend my time, who I should talk to. Sure, happy to do it. He goes, why don't we play golf? Well, I signed up for that immediately. We went and did that. And he said, well, hey, listen, here's the first person I think you should talk to. Talk to my brother, David. David is president of Choice Hotels. Now, I can't guarantee he's going to buy from you, but I'll guarantee he'll take your phone call. So, and that led to some pretty nice business. So, again, quite simple. It's a fundamental, but I promise you, if you take some time, make a list, come up with the people that you think you could have that conversation with, or maybe send them an email, say, he'd love to get your advice, your insight, or your recommendation. You pick one. You don't ask them all three, obviously, whichever you're comfortable with, and have that conversation. I think you'll be very surprised how quickly you'll end up with a group of suspects that can turn into prospects and potentially turn into clients for you.
And John, you're talking about that from the perspective of, you know, engaging in dialogue and from a referral perspective, or?
Sure, could, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can be, you know, I've had people say, you know what, it's really not my wheelhouse. I wouldn't really know, but you should talk to Steve Beppel, because I think, you know, a conversation like this with him, he would probably be able to, you know, turn you into a lot of people that might be a good fit for what you do.
Yeah.
You know, I've got some experience with this, in some success in employing this to have conversations with my LinkedIn connections. Now, early on in my career, I didn't really understand the concept of how LinkedIn works. And so I was originally collecting LinkedIn connections like Facebook friends. I was just, you know, connect. And so as a result, I ended up having a whole bunch of them who I really didn't know. I wanted to know them, but I didn't know them, and they didn't know how it worked either, so they connected with me. And so this was actually using Air was a wonderful way for me to go in and have those conversations so I can start to get to know those people. So just from a tactical point of view, that's what I did using Air in my my LinkedIn strategy, which has actually paid really nice benefits.
Yeah, and you have to remember, again, if that fundamental of when we ask people for help or insights like that, we're actually paying them a compliment. I respect you.
Yeah.
Think about when somebody says to you, hey, I'd love to get your opinion on this. And it's an easy ask, and it's conversational. We're not asking somebody to put us in their will or, you know, lend us money. I mean, we're asking for some advice or some recommendations, and people are more than willing to help. So I would highly urge you to give this a try, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I'm still going to ask you about getting into your will, John, but that's a whole separate conversation.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah. So I think, you know, fundamentally, if we kind of recap here, right, and we look back, so time blocking, and I want to go back to one thing that Tim said from a time blocking perspective, and it's one thing to put a bunch of stuff on your calendar. It's another thing to protect it as if, you know, it's worth gold, literal gold from that perspective, right? I put things on the calendar that are generally not movable. right? There are some things that are not movable. This 12:30 to 1 p.m. time, not really movable. Wouldn't do me well if we didn't show up for this, right? So time blocking is a fundamental that if we do it well, can help us achieve excellence. We protect our time. We stay on the right side of, pay time versus no pay time, for example. I think if we look at listening, right? If we look at listening from the perspective of, listening to our prospects, nobody wants to, and this relates a little bit to your point on air, John, nobody wants us to show up and talk about I, me. They don't want to hear stuff about me. They'd rather talk about themselves. And listening is a fundamental there. If we're managing and leading people, listening is always going to get us much, much farther than if I just show up and throw up, right? If I pontificate on my experience, my opinion, the way you should do things, and all three of us have talked about, we talk to business owners, managers, leaders, et cetera, all day long, and there's still a lot of that out there, right? And I think this is the cure, is getting out of this motion of being an 18-second listener. And then what we just talked about, which is AIR, advice, insights, recommendations. And what a great way to, open up the conversation. Michael Norton commented that, he's using AIR and it's actually working, which that's a great comment, Michael. I appreciate that. The other thing that Michael put in there is listen with the same passion with which you desire to be heard, right? If you listen as passionately as you want to be heard, then you really can make some inroads with what people that you're managing and leading, people that you're serving from a prospecting perspective, people that you're serving from a, the client relationship perspective. So, gentlemen, any other thoughts on this? We could go deep and wide with, with all of these, certainly. But any last comments in the last couple of minutes that we have?
Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I just want to encourage you to time block, AIR, and active listening, and the 18-second listening. So it's something that you can build into your calendar. It's a discipline. These are all disciplines that you can practice and work like a muscle. And so I just want to encourage you, use this stuff right out of the blocks. Give it a shot and have fun with it. So, John?
Yep.
No, I'm good. I was just going to say, I think just coming back to what we said earlier, I mean, I think in times of struggle sometimes, or when things are not going well, we look for something new. We look for maybe something I'm not doing or something that's missing or I should be doing. And it's really, even if you think about, I'm a pretty avid golfer. I know Jim is as well. The best golfers in the world, when their game gets off, they don't reinvent their golf swing. They'll typically go back and find out that there's some fundamental that they're not doing that's causing them a lot of difficulties. So these are fundamentals, but it is the things that we do consistently and that we do well. We want to do more of that. Don't get lost in searching for something new, because you probably don't need it.
Absolutely.
Jim, I want to read something. Steve Phones made an excellent point. He said by slowing down, and he did this in chat, by slowing down to listen, we become much more capable of delivering what prospects and clients really want or need. Serves both. And it's just a wonderful point.
Absolutely. Here's what I'd like to do. We got a minute left. We're kind of closing this half an hour out. For those of you that are on the meeting still, I would love to hear one of two things. One, give us a takeaway from this, right? Type that in the chat. Number two, we have a list of topics that we want to cover, but I also want to hear from you if there's any topic out there that you want more information on, anything that we could bring you, right? Please type that in the chat. I would love to see some activity in the chat here with either a takeaway or something that you have an interest in as it relates to sales management, leading an organization, et cetera. So we're right at 1 o'clock as promised. We want to give you 30 minutes of tactics that you can take away. As we are ending this meeting, just want to say thank you, and please leave a comment in the chat. Tim, John, any final words?
No, just everybody have a great balance of the week. And if you get a chance, get outside and try to enjoy. Hope wherever you are, you have some beautiful weather.
Excellent.
Same.
All right.
Happy selling and happy hunting. So.
Yeah, be well,
Excellent.
everybody.
Be well, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you.